Welcome, 16-bit hockey fans, to yet another edition of the NHL 94 podcast. I'm Len the Legend, and again, joined by AJ, and today we'll be doing Adam's division for the Genesis. AJ, before we go in, how are you?
I'm doing good today. Excited to get into the Eastern Conference, or the Wales Conference, as they once called it.
Yeah, I remember the good old days, the Campbells versus the Wales, and yeah, it's sad that that's no longer the case, but either way, we must move forward and not think about the past. But okay, first thoughts about this division. We're talking about the Adams, some very interesting teams here. Actually, you know what? I got to share my screen before we go any further. Let me just share this. Figure this out. Give me 1 second. Voila. There we are. Any like overall comments you have about this division before we dive in? Is there some interesting teams here?
There are some interesting teams, and there's a lot of depth, which means a lot of options. Aside from Buffalo, there's a lack of elite star power. So you're talking about workman-like teams with lots of options. So there's a lot to sift through here, and we're going to try and help everybody out with that.
And we'll dive deep first into the Boston Bruins, an interesting team. I tend not to use them a heck of a lot, although they are a very good team in the right players' hands, and that's not me, so that's why I tend to shy away from them. But still, nonetheless, a very respectable team. They got a lot going for them, especially on defense. Yeah, dive into this. Go ahead with how you would set up this team.
So I wasn't kidding when I said these teams had a lot of depth. We have a lot of options here available for all kinds of different play styles. The first option I kind of will direct myself to is Oates on the left wing, Juno at center, and Donato at right wing. So Juno plays that kind of faux sniper role, like a false nine in soccer, where he has enough shot power to kind of do the job on one-timers and floaters and a wide array of scoring opportunities, but he's not very consistent with three accuracy. He's also the best defensive option on the team with his skating ability and his lightweight. That's kind of his calling card, is just real good, solid player across the board with a lightweight. And then Donato is just a mucker up and down the wing. Not a lot of agility, but 4 speed, 4 weight. He's a really nice, change of pace just to kind of cause problems on the forecheck. You can just kind of dedicate him to that sort of option because the defense on Boston is so strong. And there's other, Juno's a good defensive forward on his own. So you can really just be reckless with Donato to some extent. And then
Pat is there.
Yeah, he wants to talk about the Panthers, but that's next episode.
Yes.
And then Oates is kind of the closest thing you're going to get to an all-star forward on this team. He's got the elite stick handling and passing combination, very high offensive awareness, excellent agility, just kind of a middleweight. And he's not the fastest player, so he's not great one-on-one per se. I mean, he can do some damage there, but he's not like going to carry a game like a Madonna or Bure or Ronick or anything like that. But he's a very effective player and a key component to this line. He's basically the one constant for all of these lines. Oates is going to be on it somewhere and being an important contributor. Neely is also an option. You can put him at center, put him at right wing, left wing. Like, he kind of plays well at any spot because of his offensive awareness and his shooting ability. He's got the 4-5 shot, 4 power, 5 accuracy. So he's very consistent. 10 weight. You don't really want to carry the puck up the ice with him too much. But he's really good on his own in AI mode because he's got the high checking, the 4 checking. So he kind of just crushes whoever's on his wing, and then he can kind of pick up loose trash and one-timer opportunities to really make his mark on the scoreboard. And then after that, you still have a multitude of options that maybe not be starter worthy, but as we saw in the most recent Classic A playoffs where Boston was being utilized, you can go as far down as Steven Hines and Steven Leach and have an effective lineup. If you're Plavix. If you're not Plavix, maybe you don't go down that low. Maybe you stick with Kvartalnov or Ruzicka or Dave Poulin or Pantaleev or there's so many guys on this team. They all bring a little something to the table, but typically Oates, Juno, Donato, and Neely is the 4 you're going to start with, and you're going to kind of fabricate them in the way you want to use their preference, really. And then you move to your defense, which is really the star-studded portion of this team. Again, so many options. You have Don Sweeney, who's your weight bug specialist, 4 weight, 4 speed, agility, 4 checking in AI mode, so he does his own work on his own as well. You have Ray Bork, or Ray, or Raimundo Borco, as I like to call him, who just dominates whether you're using user control, because he's got all this. He's the most skilled defenseman by far in the game, because he also has a 5-5 shot, which is very rare. So you can, take your slappers with him if you can get him up the ice. The only issue is he's 10 weight. So it's, again, difficult to carry the puck up the ice with him. But if he gets there and you get to unleash a slapper, you have a very dangerous weapon that cannot be replicated anywhere else in the game from the back line. He's got 6 checking. He's the only player in the game with 6 checking. So he just crushes people on his own. And then he's an ultimate CB checker. And then you have super subs, Glenn Wesley, Gord Murphy, 5 agility, 4 speed. Very unusual combinations for a defenseman. One's a lefty, one's a righty. Wesley's slightly more skilled. Murphy's a little bit more aggressive. You could use them as options as well. You could pair Sweeney with Bork. You could pair Bork with Gord Murphy, Bork with Wesley, Sweeney with Murphy, Sweeney with Wesley. I mean, there's not really a wrong combination. If you don't like Bork, you can actually bench him on this team for a really good player. So, you don't have to feel as bad about it. But I tend to play Bork and Sweeney as my default and then adjust from there if needed. Then you even have great bench options like Glenn Featherston. He comes in as a sub, 11 weight, 3-3 skating. So that's a good combination. He also has 4 checking. Just kind of that nice hammer in the back if, say, you lose Bork and you want a big CB check presence, Featherstone can fit the bill. And then David Shaw is just there for informational purposes because he's a default sub. If you don't make any adjustments on a penalty, David Shaw's fine, but I don't know if I'd want to play him in tier 2 because Boston's a tier 2 team and there's a lot of speed in this tier. So you may want to take out David Shaw and put in one of your really good options like Wesley or Murphy or even Featherston. So this team's pretty solid 1 to 5. It doesn't have a superstar that really carries the torch, but you get Bork, who's maybe one of the top 3 defensemen, if not the top defenseman. You get Sweeney, who's the best weight bug defenseman in the game. So that's a really nice, way to start your team. And then Andy Moog, good goalie, especially in user control. Pretty solid pads, good mobility. His overall is like 59, so it's pretty low for a starting goalie. But that's because he has low awareness ratings. Once you take those out of consideration, he's actually a very highly rated goalie, which is why a lot of people will draft him in draft leagues higher than you may suspect. And he's typically the consistent starter over John Blue, who's, I think, a 60 overall. But he's a little bit heavier, doesn't move as well with the lower agility ratings. All you get is the boosted awareness, as the pads and the puck control are actually very comparable to Moog. So I go Moog. He's a great option. And, this is just a really good team for tier 2. They play better from ahead than they do behind. That is for sure. So you want to get those early goals with this team, try and jump on your opponent quickly, and then suffocate them defensively because that's what this team is made for. They're basically a little bit lower powered Montreal, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
So what's their kryptonite then? In terms of tier 2, who's the team that would give them the most fits?
Winnipeg gives them a lot of fits because they have good stick handling, and they're fairly light, and they're very tough to defend because they have speed, they have agility, they have stick handling, they have shot power, they have shot accuracy. They have a good goalie on their own, the best goalie in the tier. So that kind of helps mitigate some of this pop gun offense on Boston because, like I said, they don't have a ton of shot power. If you bench Neely, you leave yourself with basically Juno, who's inconsistent, and then Oates and Donato, who are lighter shot power guys. So you're trying to press to get Bork involved, and then that leaves openings for Winnipeg to really handle. LA is not a bad matchup either, but the Rudy's a weakness. He's a big weakness, so it's a little bit trickier, but still very doable. And then taking Boston into tier 1 is also not usually a great idea because they don't handle the speed as well on a consistent basis. And then like teams like Detroit or Chicago, they can kind of overpower Moog from multiple positions as opposed to say like, Winnipeg, where you might have a couple of weak shooters on the wing, or LA, you have Gretzky to consider. So you want to keep Boston within its tier and be very selective when you go up and above.
Anything last words before we sign off on them and go to Buffalo?
It's a fun team. It's got a little bit for everybody. And it doesn't take a whole lot to be very good with them if you kind of play within yourself.
Yeah. In the right hands, yeah, they're tremendous. And moving on to the Buffalo Sabres, a heck of a team. You don't have to be a great player to great, like me, for instance. I can start playing with them and do a pretty good job at holding my own. Grant Fuhr, love him in real life, and in this game, he gets a lot of love. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on the Buffalo Sabres?
So Buffalo's a tier 1 team, and they kind of buck the trend in this tier. They're all star power, not a lot of depth. There's a lot of different lineup combinations, basically because you can switch your 3 top players into a lot of different ways. Most people go LaFontaine on the left, McGillney at center, Howard-Chuck on the right. But you can take McGillney out of the center, and he's fine. You can put LaFontaine in the middle. He's going to do okay. You can put Howard-Chuck on either wing. He's going to make plays. He's going to get involved. A lot of people don't necessarily care for Howard-Chuck, though. So basically, your top sub will be Yuri Himalev, who can kind of slot in on that right wing, maybe even the left wing if you really want to. And, he can just unleash one-timers because he's a consistent shooter. And that's something that this team doesn't necessarily have a lot of once you get past McGillney. So, the good thing about Buffalo is that they have, 3 players with 5 stick handling and 5 passing, and all their forwards have at least 5 agility. And you even got 2 guys with 6 offensive awareness. So you have all this talent, all this stuff coming together, but they're more of a one-on-one team in that McGillney's basically the best player with the puck on his stick in the entire game. He's very difficult to defend. And LaFontaine and Howard-Chuck aren't really guys you can, drop the puck off to and get consistent one-timer action from, or have them create dynamic plays on their own. It's kind of a weird dynamic where you have all this talent to pass the puck around to, but you don't have a true sniper, because even McGillney can be tough to get into the one-timer lanes as he just kind of zooms up and down the ice, and you're trying to catch up to him with these slower wings, and it doesn't always work out. When it does, it's great, yes, but the chemistry on this team can be a little weird because of that. So it's a fun team. It's a great team, but it does take a little bit of doing. But at least they can play pretty good defense. LaFontaine's a great weight bug checker. Howard-Chuck's a pretty solid option as well. He can skate really well and shadow players and stick check them. And McGillney, you can at least chase people down and try and cut off angles. He may not be the most he might not be the easiest person to line checks up with, and he's not very light or heavy. He's kind of weight neutral, so he's mostly reduced to poke checks and positional play. But ideally, you kind of turn the puck over with these forwards or cause problems and cut off lanes and create turnovers, and then get the puck to McGillney eventually and let him do his magic. And if you have to get to a half-court offense, you let LaFontaine maybe guide the ship a little bit more, or even Howard-Chuck. They really play well off each other when they can kind of get on the same page. A lot of the sub options I wouldn't really recommend in tier 1. Bob Sweeney's a little slow. He's got good defensive awareness, good checking, but doesn't really fit on this line. Bob Aries, pretty fast, 4-4 skating, but really low skilled guy. Audette's a little slow, even though he's a weight bugger. And then Presley's got a good shot, but he's also a little slow. And then Rob Ray is just kind of there to have some fun. He's got really weird ratings. He's got 4 speed, 3 agility, but then 1s and 2s everywhere else. So, I mean, if you want a guy who can just kind of throw a CB check out there and skate a little bit, he's kind of fun.
He's
but
your guy.
yeah. But usually in tier 1, if you get into penalty trouble or injury trouble, you're in bad shape as it is with Buffalo, because once they lose, especially if they lose McGillney, the team drops probably at least 1 tier, even though they have good support elsewhere. You have Peter Svoboda on defense, moving on to the defense. He's a great weight bug check defenseman, a little not quite as effective as Don Sweeney, who we just talked about, but top 2 or 3 in his own right. He's got the 4-4 skating, but he does not have the skill set to really drive an offense. It's pretty average. And then we see the lack of depth here, as here's one of the weaknesses for this team is their second defenseman. Schmalik is serviceable, kind of at that Doug Lidster level, maybe not even quite that. 10 weight, good enough skating at 3-3, 4 checking, so he can kind of do some work on his own. He's a good CB check option, but he doesn't bring much else to the table. And he can be difficult to use when there's an aggressive forecheck, because he's not that fast. He doesn't pass that great. He's not very elusive. So he can be a bit tricky when he does get the puck on his stick. So you got to be very aware of when that happens. And the options behind him are they're even worse. You got Doug Bodger, who's a default starter who you need to get out of the lineup because his lack of agility is an issue. 2 agility at 10 weight, that's not a good combination. Doesn't have the puck skills to make up for it either. Grant Ledyard, he moves a little bit better. He's got 4 agility and 3 speed at 9 weight. That's a good heavyweight combination, but the rest of his skill set's really bad. I mean, if you thought Schmelik was an issue getting the puck out of the zone when he's facing a forecheck, Ledyard's really going to make you pull your hair out with his 2 passing and 1 stick handling. The puck's it's a nightmare with him. And then Ken Sutton's a default sub, so just be aware of him. He's kind of just your treading water guy, 8 weight, 2-2 speed, a lot of lower end skills everywhere else. So that's the unfortunate thing about Buffalo is that they get one defenseman that they can really rely on, and then Schmelik is fine. But once you test that depth, it's over. But thankfully, they have Grant Fuhr in net. He's still at the height of his powers, really, in the NHL. He's the 3rd best goalie in the game behind Waugh and Belfour. He's got 5 agility. He's a little bit heavy. So he actually kind of feels good despite being a little bit heavy for a goalie because of that 5 agility. He really stands his ground, gets from post to post pretty good. He's got reliable glove ratings at 5 each, and he's pretty good at handling rebounds as well. Dominic Hasek, not quite rated what he should be yet. In 95, he'll get his 80 overall rating, but here he's just a lightweight option. Maybe something you consider in a draft league if you're the 24th team picking a goalie in a 26-team league. So it's good to be aware of him in that situation, but you don't want to put him in over Fuhr. Fuhr's a monster back there. He can maybe win you some games, especially at home if he's hot. He can pretend he's Waugh or Belfour every now and again, and you'll need him because that forward depth and that defensive depth, if it gets tested at all, you're no longer a tier 1 team. Less so than the other, Chicago, Detroit, Vancouver, Montreal. They have depth to withstand some issues, somewhere on their lineup. Buffalo doesn't. And that's the thing to consider. And they don't have a lot of shot power. So if they face up against Chicago or Montreal, you got to be very aware of that and construct your offense in a different way. So, that also plays with the chemistry of this team as well. So there's a lot to consider here. It's a good team, but definitely not one you can just kind of flip the switch on and go, okay, we're going to be amazing. It takes a little bit of work.
It seems like they're best suited for being a counterattack team. Just kind of wait for your moment and then just use the speed that they have up front and just take advantage of that rather than just overloading and just where other teams just come in and just kind of crash the net. This team doesn't have that ability. That's from my vantage point. Just they're better at a counterattack and try to protect that one weak defenseman and give him as much support as possible. And once you get the puck, just rush it up and then try to score with a quick counterattack. That's the way I see Buffalo really excelling. But what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good point. That is one way that they can excel, but not to discount that at all. But one thing to consider with this team is why they're not a Chicago or Detroit level is, Chicago, Detroit, Vancouver, you can take your best player and create those turnovers because they're able enough to create checks to do weight bug checks or CV checks on their own. You can't really have that. You don't really have that option with McGillney. He has to get the support from other players to get the puck back. So you're using LaFontaine or Svoboda to get the puck back, and then you're having to make an outlet pass to your best player. So it kind of adds another layer of complexity to that breakout. Once they do it, they're great. But it's not as quick as you might like in a lot of instances because you have to get the puck to your best player instead of your best player recovering the puck. And it can kind of slow things down just enough with these tier 1 teams who excel at playing defense and have top tier goalies to cause Buffalo some problems. But if you can get Buffalo flowing and get those turnovers create a lot of them and be very good with your passing and your breakouts and your zone entries, they're a very dangerous team. Yes, on that counterattack.
And maybe one of the best theme songs in the game. I love it when they score a goal at home. And any last thoughts on Buffalo before we transition to the Whalers?
Yeah, if you can get this team scoring with Sabre Dance, you will annoy your opponent, guaranteed.
Now, talking about the best song in the game, it's no doubt, in my opinion, the Hartford Whalers. I love their song. It's a shame they moved out of Hartford and moved to Carolina because the history of Hartford, the song, the Civic Center, everything that went along with it, the green uniform. Sad that they're no longer there. Either way, this team, it's a challenge to use, but if you can stay in that defensive shell, you might be able to do some damage with them. So how do you build this team when you're picking them?
Well, again, we're back into that land of having a lot of options here, a lot of depth. But there's three that I think stand head and shoulders above the rest, leaving the rest of the team kind of into spot starters or just support pieces. And your top three forwards are going to be Pat Verbeek, Jeff Sanderson, Terry Yake. They don't have a lot of elite skill, but they don't really have any pure weaknesses either. They're very straight across the board. You can kind of use all three players in a very similar manner because they bring a lot of the same things to the table. So it's easy to kind of keep a flow. Like, you don't have to worry so much about switching players on defense as much or who you're passing the puck to as much, because generally these guys are all going to do the same thing. So you don't have to worry about, oh, where's my superstar? Where's my number one guy? Where's my guy that does this thing? Or where my guy does that thing? It's like, no, they all kind of do the same thing. Just forget about it and just play the game. That's kind of the nice thing about Hartford. So you can put Verbeek really at any of the three forward spots, he's going to produce. Sanderson, any of the three spots, he's going to produce. Yake, usually you want to keep him to the wing, either one, because if he's on the left wing, he can do EA specials. If he's on the right wing, he'll just come off as the weakest forward when there's a penalty kill and you have your best penalty kill lineup on the ice just automatically. So you get some decent shooters. You got 2-4-4 shooters in Verbeek and Sanderson. So they're another team that can really play the transition game well in their tier, because there's not a lot of speed in tier 5. So they're actually a pretty decent skating team up front, and even on the back end, especially, they have some good options there that we'll get into shortly. But you have some good shooters here. And then you have a lot of weight bug options on the bench that you kind of dip into if you're playing, say a 7-weight player that you really want to shut down on the wing. You got Robert Cron, Michael Nylander, Robert Petrovicki. They're all very similar players, 5-weight. Nylander and Petrovicki are a little bit better skaters with forward agility, while Cron's slightly better skilled, but it's very slight. I'd probably rather just take the skating of Nylander over Petrovicki, because Nylander's kind of the medium, the middle ground between all three of those guys. So Nylander's your best weight bug option. And you could just pull Petrovicki off the bench if something happens to Nylander, and you'll still be just fine. And then, your CB options are Jansen's and Poulin. Poulin's pretty much threes across the board. Jansen's same thing with the extra forward checking. So if you want to just leave Jansen's on the right wing where Yake may be, and just kind of let him do his own thing and muck it up, that's fine. But you kind of limit yourself on offense to basically driving the puck up with Verbeek and Sanderson at that point. So you got to be careful with that strategy. But it is something to consider in the right matchup. If you're playing, like, he'd probably be just fine against Alexander Semak from New Jersey. Jansen's would be. So you can consider him as an option there, because the 5-weight guys can't touch Semak. He's a 6-weight, so it's very difficult for them to weight bug check him. And they all bring a very similar skill set to the table. So a lot of options here in Hartford. A really fun team to use up front. And then the defense is probably the strength of the team. You get Zarli Zalapsky, who's easily a top 10 defender, one of the better CB checking defenders in the game. 5 agility, 4 speed at 10 weight. I mean, that's a really unusual skill set or skating skill set to have. And it's very beneficial to the way he plays the game, because he can just kind of take over that back line and keep up with any forward in the tier very easily. He's got forward checking. He's got good stick handling. He's even pretty good with the puck when he gets it on his stick. You can take the random slap shot with him. The only weakness he has is he's a 3 passer. So some of his breakout passes might not be on target. That's really the only thing to have a complaint about Zalapsky. But he's got good support as well to kind of help him move that puck out and recover it. As you have Eric Weinrich, who's almost the same exact player. He just has a lack of agility in the top end skill, but 10 weight as well. Great CB check option for a second defenseman. And then Adam Birch, your lighter 7-weight defenseman. Not quite weight bug, but if you're facing off against Stephane Richer on New Jersey, he can just step into him with a weight bug check pretty easily. He's got 4 agility, which is really useful again at this level, because you don't face a lot of speedsters in tier 5. So anytime you get that extra uptick in agility, that's a huge plus. And he can even unleash his own slap shot every once in a while. He has 4-shot power as well. And then you kind of get into the rest of that defensive bench. I mean, he doesn't look good on paper, but you know what? At least they can CB check. Ladouceur, 3-3 skating, 11 weight, perfectly fine. Alan Peterson, even in a pinch. He can do the job. And then you have Doug Huda, your only right-handed option. I like to have my defenders be natural side, left hand on left side, right hand on right side. Hartford doesn't really provide you that luxury because Huda's the only right-handed defenseman, and he's a very poor defenseman. I would just stay away from him. But if you insist on having a right-handed defenseman, he's there for informational purpose. So basically, Weinrich or Burt on the left side, and you line Zalapsky up on the right side, because you want him facing off against those left wingers who are usually the stronger of the two wingers on the opposite team. So you just want him facing up against those guys, ideally, and he should be able to shut them down pretty well in a lot of cases. And then Sean Burke, you either love him or you hate him. Most people hate him. I'd probably say almost everybody hates him. 10 weight, that's the heaviest goalie in the game. Luckily, he has 4 agility, so it's not a complete nightmare when you're trying to use him in goalie control. And his pads are pretty good. His puck control is pretty good. You only have to really worry about his awareness, whatever that may or may not do to him. And then his backup options, if you really, don't enjoy using a heavy goalie, I would not recommend these backups. I mean, Goose Gosselin, 3 weight, sure, that's great. He can move maybe 2 agility. He's not going to move that great. And then Peter Angelo, he's best left as the E-bug. Unless you're making a playoff run as Pittsburgh in the early 90s, and maybe you start him out there. But aside from that, leave him alone. That's kind of Hartford. Just a really good lineup from top to bottom. Like they're like a low end Boston. They don't have that pure superstar, but you look around at all 5 guys you have on the ice and you go, I don't really have a clear weakness here. This is pretty nice. So they're also a team that plays better from ahead than behind. As long as you don't mind not having a ton of elite skill on the ice, Hartford's a pretty good team to play with at the bottom of the tiers. So
what's a good matchup against them? You mentioned New Jersey a couple of times. Is that the team that they probably are best suited to play against? So in King of 94, you're going to see them a lot against New Jersey. That's a very common matchup. This Hartford and New Jersey are 2 teams you want to familiarize yourself with very intimately if you're going to make a deep run into the NHL, the King of 94 tournaments. Hartford's a good matchup, but the Islanders are a good matchup. It's an even matchup, but you don't see that one very much because people despise using Glenn Healy and net on the Islanders. And the Islanders have defensive issues that we'll get into in the next episode. They're very weird. You have the much maligned Benoit Hogue. You have no forward depth. Turgeon's kind of a love or hate option as your number 1 forward. So most people stay away from the Islanders. There's also, Washington's kind of in this neighborhood. You might see Washington, Hartford as well. That's not a bad matchup either because Hartford can really take advantage of Don Beaupre, and they have enough skating, to kind of offset the Washington defense. If you're facing up against Kevin Hatcher, who's pretty slow, or Kalle Johansson, who's not the fastest guy, or even Sylvain Cote, who's not really going to do a whole lot because he's not a weight bugger and he can't take down these forwards. And then Washington's just weird in general. They kind of shoot themselves in the foot in a lot of cases, and Hartford just picks up the pieces and deposits the puck on the net. So those are the 3 teams that are closest to them that you're going to see most often, but I would rank it. Devils you're going to see a lot. Washington you'll see some. Islanders you almost see never. And that's kind of where they live. Interesting. Because I like playing with the Islanders, which is an interesting I guess I'm one of the few people that like playing with them, but I don't want to talk too much about the Islanders this episode. Any last thoughts on Hartford before we go to the Habs? Yeah, I'm with you. I love Brass Bonanza, so I don't mind seeing these guys get selected and score goals. I love hearing that song. All right, let's go over to Montreal, the team that it's a light team. I like playing with light players. Not a good big CB checker, so this team suits me very well. Plus, having Patrick Roy, how could you go wrong with this? It's a really fun team to play with, easy to play with, I find. Unless I play you, then I get smoked 14-0. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this team? Well, let's start from the back out. Let's change it up here. Let's talk about Patrick Roy before he gets those 2 Stanley Cup rings in his ears and he can't hear me anymore. He's the 1A or the 1B with Ed Belfour and NHL 94. 6 weight, 6 agility, 6 glove rating, 6 puck control. That's a lot of elite skill for a goalie, and he can definitely steal some games for the Canadiens, and he will need to do it in the tier 1/tier 2 matchups that he'll see. Montreal really lives in between the tiers, so you'll see some Montreal Vancouver. You'll may even see Montreal Buffalo. Someone's really brave, but you see a lot of Montreal Boston, Montreal Winnipeg.
even Montreal, Calgary. And Waz is a great starting point for the Canadiens. He can really hold down the fort, especially at home where they have the high home advantage. If he's hot, boosting that stick rating, because you can't boost the perfect ratings he already has for the glove and the puck control and the agility. If he can boost the other ratings, oh man, he's a nightmare. He can really shut the door on a lot of teams, even the higher skilled teams. And red light Racicot, keep him away from the red light. Just let Wad do his thing. Even if he's struggling in a game, don't matter. Let him do his thing. Don't pull him. Even if it's only maybe he gets to 8 or 9 goals, maybe consider it so he doesn't ask for a trade. But just don't give up 8 or 9. That's the secret. Then you move on to their defense. This is where a lot of tough decisions have to be made because they don't have a real standout defender. I mean, Desjardins is probably your number one just because he's the most skilled, but he's kind of heavy. He's not very fast. He's not going to dictate a game on his own. He's just going to be a nice support piece. You want him to be reliable, and you almost don't even want to notice him. If you don't notice him, he's probably doing a good job marking his man, clearing out the front of the net, and helping Patrick Waugh play a strong defensive game. And you can knock down a lot of tier 1 and tier 2 forwards with the CB check with Desjardins. He's pretty heavy in this tier range. The second defenseman's a lot trickier to identify. There's Matthew Schneider, who's fast for a defenseman, but not very agile. He's not a good checker, doesn't bring a real elite skill. I mean, he can kind of move the puck pretty well, but that's about it. It's going to be tough to get the puck with him. So how much are you really moving the puck with him if he doesn't acquire it? JJ Daniel, he's more of my default option. 6 weight, so not super light, but light enough. For agility, I prefer the agility over the speed, if given the option. He's got 4 shot power and 2 shot accuracy, so he's actually a pretty good shooter for a defender if you ever get into the situation, which I don't find myself there too often, but it's nice to just kind of have that up your sleeve if you need it, because not a lot of guys realize he's a good shooter, so you can kind of surprise some people in a matchup. Unleash a slapper with him. It's like, oh crap, I didn't realize that JJ Daniel could do that, because he doesn't really get a chance to do it very often. The real bugaboo about Daniel, 2 passer, so those breakout passes, they can really go awry for him. But at least he's doing a lot of other things on the ice. Like, he might acquire the puck often enough to, make enough breakout passes over the course of the game to be a positive contributor, where Schneider might not have the puck enough to make, enough of a difference with the fewer chances he has. So you kind of have to weigh what the balance is for you. And then Brisebois is your weight bug option, 5 weight, 3-3 skating, which is fine, especially for a right-handed defenseman, because you get a little bit better skating animations. It's a little easier to control him. But again, he's pretty poor with the puck on his stick. And then Kevin Haller is there because he's a default sub. If you don't take him out, he's okay. He's not the worst thing in the world, but I mean, he's not going to help you a lot either. So you might be better off subbing one of these better. Like, if Daniel goes in the box, I'd probably be wise to bring Brisebois off the bench or Snyder instead of letting Haller do his thing. But most combinations, you either have Desjardins or Brisebois on the right, Daniel and Schneider on the left, and you just kind of pick the 2 that you want. I don't really like to flip them around too much or put Daniel with Schneider or Desjardins with Brisebois unless I really find that there's a situation where I want to do that. Maybe if I'm playing Buffalo and the guy only likes to skate up the ice with McGillney, never using his other players, maybe I'll have the CB guy, Desjardins, and the weight bug option, Brisebois. They can both attack McGillney when needed. But aside from that, I'm probably staying away from that type of situation. But at least the forwards, this is probably the best set of 2-way forwards outside of Vancouver that you're going to see in the game, from top to bottom. And there's a lot of good combinations. Montreal doesn't have a lot of top-end skill, but what top-end skill they do have is in stick handling. Denis Savard, Vincent Damphousse, elite stick handlers, especially Savard, 5 agility, right-handed, 5 weight. He's not really dangerous when he's shooting the puck, but he gets himself in such good situations that he can actually score some goals in close and create chances for other players to cash in on. And that's what, Montreal is really going to specialize in. They have some pretty accurate shooters to play alongside with Savard and Damphousse. They can be a nightmare if they're hot. If they're just absorbing checks, skating through people, it all of a sudden makes Montreal just a beast to play against, because the opponent's trying to commit pieces to score on Watt and to score on this elite defensive team. So they're up the ice, and Montreal's great at countering because They're very agile. They move as a unit. They can stick through that, one defender that you may have left available, and then find their open option to just deposit the puck in the net because they're accurate shooters. So this is, I think, one of the best counterattack teams in the game, because the other team has to commit so much, and this team can just punish them, with Apalm. It's really something to see out there. And then your center option, you have LeBeau, who's the lightweight option. So you could run an all bugger lineup with a lot of skill, which is a very unusual thing to be able to do in this game. Or you could put Muller out there, who's a little bit better shooter power wise. So this team also doesn't have a lot of shot power. So putting a guy out there with some shot power helps diversify the lineup a little bit and make it a little bit more dangerous from further out on the ice. And he's pretty good in AI mode too. He's got the forechecking along with basically fours. He's fours everywhere. So, but he's a great CB checker. He does work on his own. He'll clean up the middle. He'll clean up the wing. Wherever you put him, you pretty much know what you're going to get out of him almost every game. He's a very consistent player. So those are really your top 4 forward options: Muller, Savard, LeBeau, Damphousse. You can kind of do whatever you want with them. Most people put Savard on the left, Damphousse on the right, and then Muller or LeBeau in the center. And you can even move that around a little bit. You can put LeBeau in the center and Muller on the wing and Savard on the right, and that's still a good lineup as well. And then you have all sorts of depth. If you lose Muller, put in Bellows, basically the same player. If you lose, Savard, you can put in Keane or Leanman. They have 4 skating, 5 weight. They're not as good with the puck, but they kind of are brief approximations of what the player they're replacing is. Guy Carbonneau, he's kind of a fun little player. There are certain matchups, maybe against like Winnipeg, where I might actually consider playing him. Because he's got high agility, he's got high checking. Because Winnipeg can be kind of tough to check if you're Montreal. They kind of live in that zone where it's difficult to hit them. Carbonneau's got 4 checking, so you can actually kind of CB some of those guys, especially Borsato, or even Solani in some cases. You can kind of, if you get the good momentum and you hit him square on, you can just run those guys over with Carbonneau. But he's very poor on offense. He can't shoot. He's good with stick handling and passing, but not like Damphousse and Savard. So he's more of a reserve option to kind of keep in mind for very specific situations. And, this is just a great team to have, to put pressure on your opponent, especially when you're ahead, because then they're having to commit even more. And that's just where Montreal can just be fuel to the fire of those situations. They can get some real big blowouts because of that, where the other team just leaves himself wide open and Montreal is just there to clean it all up.
I noticed that, and I played a lot with Montreal, and I put generally LeBeau in middle and Damphousse on right and Savard in left wing. And when there's ever an attack, a sustained attack against the opponent, those forwards, they're like hornets going to the net. They're always just buzzing around there because they're light and they're just always they know where to be. Especially Damphousse seems to be at the right spot, the right time. He seems to have a knack for just finding the open ice and just depositing the puck. I don't know what it is, but there's synergy within that lineup, and it works really well. Till I play you, then I get blown out of the water. But yeah, it's still a lot of fun to play with the Habs. Just such an easy team for the most part. Any final thoughts on them before we move over to Ottawa?
I 100% agree with you. They have a ton of chemistry. They're a pain in the neck to play against. They're firing on all cylinders. They're a real bugger to go against.
Ottawa Senators, I don't know how we can make anything out of this. This is there's no chicken salad we can make from this one. So go ahead. Let's see what you could come up with this one.
Ottawa. Oh man. Good thing we talked about Montreal just a moment ago. And we have a pretty good team after this to talk about, but okay. This is the not good part of the hamburger. Where do you start with this team? Oh man. I guess Sylvain Turgeon, sure. He's fast. He does the skate thing. You can put him on a wing. He's actually pretty fast for this tier, no lie. 4.4 skating, that's the best skating forward you're going to get in tier 6. So that's actually kind of nice to have. He helps diversify the lineup. He helps put pressure on the other team, like you're playing against Tampa Bay or Anaheim. He can kind of cause those teams some problems with his skating ability. He's not very good with the puck. Pretty weak shot, 3 power, 2 accuracy. Doesn't pass it well, 2 passing. Kind of a all-out offensive player without a whole lot of production to show for it. You just hope he gets enough chances, kind of like Russ Courtnall, but in tier 6. You hope he creates enough chances to where he puts some points up on the board, because there's not a lot of offense outside of him on this team. Bob Kudelski is just your low end sniper. 3-shot power forward accuracy, not too bad at this tier, but doesn't really bring anything else to the table that's noteworthy. He's kind of heavy. So, and then one issue with this team is if you put Kudelski and Turgeon on the same line, they're both 9 weight. You know, they don't. It's very difficult to move the puck up the ice in some instances when you have a larger team that can be kind of inconsistent with passing the puck. So you have to be careful about what you're doing with having them both on the ice. I tend to not like to have them both on the ice, which is why I have, you know, the first line being Turgeon in the left, Baker in the center, and Smale on the right. Baker's kind of just your vanilla forward, 3s everywhere, except checking where he's a 2, middleweight. I mean, he kind of goes okay at any forward position, but he doesn't really pop anywhere. He's just a solid contributing forward, which, you know, at tier 6 you'll definitely take when you're faced with, you know, the rest of the options on the lineup. Doug Smale is just kind of your best weight bug option. 3-3 skater, pretty nice at 5 weight, but everything else it's a real uphill battle with him. He does not move the puck well. He doesn't shoot it. Doesn't do a lot of AI work with his low checking. And that's another thing you'll notice with Ottawa. They have a lot of guys that just don't really check. So they're kind of a passive AI team. You have to do a lot of work with Ottawa to get the puck back. But luckily, Doug Smale, like, he's actually pretty good against San Jose because they have a lot of 7-weight players. And Doug Smale is at 5 weight. He can just weight bug these guys. He keeps up with them pretty well. He can be a valuable piece in a matchup like that. But if you want a better shooting option, you could put Kudelski at the center. I don't usually like to put him on the wing. So if you put him in center and you put Baker and Smale on a wing, that's a pretty decent lineup as well. And then Turgeon and Baker surrounding Kudelski's, you know, kind of your all-out offensive lineup if you need a goal late in the game, or if you think you can just kind of pressure someone more than they can hurt you with their expansion team, you may want to put out your best lineup and just try and make the other team defend you more often than not. So that's one lineup to consider. They actually have pretty good depth, those Ottawa. Lamb and Boschman both have 4 agility. Boschman's real issue is he has 2 speed, but even then, he's actually pretty good at deking. And, you know, his first step is really nice. And he's not a bad player, but I tend to go with Lamb as the first guy off the bench if I lose Smale. Because, you know, Lamb can't shoot for a jack, but that's okay. I just want him to not give up goals. So he's pretty effective at that. And then Lazaro and Brady, you get another weight bug option that shoots a little bit better. So if you want a lighter guy who can maybe shoot, go to Lazaro. If you want a CB guy, for whatever reason, Neil Brady's there. He's a former, I think he was number 2 draft pick, number 3 draft pick overall in the mid 80s. Finally getting his chance at the NHL with Ottawa, and we never heard of him again. So enjoy your moment in the sun, Neil Brady, on this podcast. You may not get another one.
I'll have to interview him. What a weak set of forwards, but yeah.
Yeah, it's at least they all kind of do something different from each other. So you have some choices to make, and these are really the only choices you have to make in the entire lineup because the defense does not really provide such luxuries. You basically get Norman Kyver on the left and Bradshaw on the right, and you better enjoy it because if you try to go from there, you're getting a really bad player. McIver's kind of your faux number 1 defenseman. He's your only guy on the blue line with 3-3 skating, so he's basically going to be tasked with all the duties, moving the puck, shadowing the best player, driving the offense, even in some cases. He doesn't have a lot of offensive skills per se, but 3-3 skating, 6 weight at this tier is nothing to shake a stick at you. Mm-hmm. And with the forwards that Ottawa has, you might have to just call him up the ice and hope he can create something. Bradshaw, 2 speed, but he's got 3 agility, and he's a right-hander, so he goes on the right side. That's how this works on Ottawa. You just find your right-hander and you put him there, even though he's not very fast. He's okay with the puck, good enough for breakout passes if the puck ever's on his stick, but he's not a big checker in any regard. Just kind of want to play positionally with him and take up space. Just don't be aggressive with him. Don't take yourself out of position because then he's really useless. He's never going to get back into position. Then you have your bench options. I mean, one bench option I kind of like to use is Brad Marsh. He's basically my number 1 off the bench. That helmetless beaut, 11 weight, 3 checking. even though he's got 2 agility, 2 speed, and he can't do a darn thing with the puck, it doesn't matter. It does not matter because he just crushes people with this tier. You line anybody up against any team in this tier at forward, he's going to demolish them. And that's what I like about him because he's reliable in that regard. I will sub out Shaw and put in McIver, or no, excuse me, I will put in Marsh on the left, put McIver at the right. If I feel pretty confident that I can CB check people with Marsh. So he's my number 1 option. Ken Hammond's my other option off the bench. He's the only other guy with 3 agility on the entire defensive core. But he doesn't do anything else with the puck either. He's a real turnover machine. And then Darren Rumble, leave him on the bench. Chris Luongo, I use him in stock league. He's okay, but again, maybe I put him out there if there's a bunch of 8 or 9 weight forwards. Like if I have to go up against Brian Scoulin from Florida, Luongo can weight bug check him. He's not that bad of a skater because he's right-handed, so it helps kick up his ratings a little bit. So he could be useful there. That's about it. But that defense core is really rough. And then if you thought this was bad, just wait. You got Sidorkiewicz manning the pipes, and he's not good. All-star selection be damned. He's not rated highly in this game. 6'6" weight, 2 agility. That's a really bad combination. This man refuses to move. This guy is stubborn as heck. Doesn't have a lot of awareness either, so he doesn't see things coming, and not that great with his pads. There's a real decision here to be made with who to put in net, as you have Daniel Bandit Berthwain behind him. 1 weight, 3 agility. This man is ripe for crease crashes. He's going to get pushed into his net time and time again, but at least you can move him around in manual goalie. And manual goalie is something you may need to use a lot with Ottawa because their defense does not help them in a lot of situations. So that is a real decision you have to make, whether to go with the slow guy who doesn't move or the really skinny guy who moves too much.
There's a couple of questions I have for you with Ottawa. So I'm going to ask you the easier of the 2 questions. I see that their road ice disadvantage is noted here as brutal. Can you comment on that?
So that's -3. There's low, which is no disadvantage. There's average, which is a -1, high -2, and brutal -3. Only the expansion teams are saddled with the -3 brutal ratings. So that's really one thing to consider when you're calling tier 6 matchups in a tournament. Is if you're calling the matchup, you're the visitor, you will be saddled with a brutal road disadvantage unless you're Tampa Bay. But if you put Tampa Bay in a matchup, you're giving your opponent Tampa Bay, which means you have the road disadvantage that's brutal by default. So you're never going to pick an expansion matchup. I mean, maybe you call Tampa Bay San Jose, the other guy takes San Jose. That's like the only situation where maybe that happens. But if the guy knows what he's doing, he's going to take Tampa Bay because it's Tampa Bay, San Jose, and then you got your other 3, Ottawa, Anaheim, Florida, basically straight across the line below those top 2. If you pick Ottawa with Tampa Bay, you're never getting Tampa Bay. You're always getting Ottawa. So you're always going to be brutal disadvantage. And it can be really bad some games. It can be very difficult to move the puck around, complete passes. Your shot accuracy goes kerflooey. I mean, these guys already aren't very accurate shooters. They're not very powerful shooters. So these guys can shoot some real lollipops up there that, don't even threaten the goal. Guy Bear is kind of laughing at you, and he's really bad. So it's something to consider. You have to be comfortable with that. You have to be okay with your team might be really bad, and you might have to get very creative in terms of trying to create offense and keep these guys in places on defense to where they at least get in the way because they're not really going to hit people on their own. So
it sounds like there's really only 2 opponents that they might have a chance: Florida and Anaheim. So is Ottawa going to have an advantage against any of those 2 teams, or are they the worst team in the game in your opinion?
I think they have an advantage against Anaheim. Florida, I think, is pretty even. Florida is the better defensive team. Ottawa is the better offensive team. It's kind of whoever gets something going on offense. If Florida can get 3 or 4 goals, it can be tricky to score that many on them with Ottawa. But if they can't score themselves, you might be able to squeak out a win with Ottawa. I've seen people try and use them against San Jose. Might work. Smale's a good option against San Jose. Turgeon at least can skate with them pretty well, and Baker's perfectly fine. and then McIver and Shaw, or I even put Marsh in that game. Especially if Gaudreau's on a wing, I might put Marsh on Gaudreau's wing, because Gaudreau's not a very good skater, so Marsh can really lay lumber on him if you're able to. But yeah, you're kind of stuck in Florida and Anaheim if you're not feeling that brave.
That's pretty much them in a nutshell. Any last words you want to, before we could finally get off this crappy team?
I used this team a lot growing up, so I'm very familiar with these guys.
Quebec Nordiques, a team that seemingly has a lot of firepower, but for some reason just sometimes doesn't gel. I don't know what it is. Some days, some games I seem to be unstoppable. Others I'm giving up double digits goals. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, what are your thoughts on building lines with Quebec?
It's tricky. You can kind of trick yourself into thinking, oh, all these players are different. I mean, Kaminsky's got 5 shot power and 8 weight. He's kind of the big guy. You got Sakic and Sundin. They're middleweights with good skill sets, but you got Kovalenko. He's just a little bugger out there. You can crush people like Fleury. And then you got Nolan, who does a little bit of everything. And it's just, but at the end of the day, they're all shooters first, except for Kovalenko.
Mm-hmm.
These guys all shoot first, ask questions second. And none of them have a dynamic skating ability to really put the pressure on a team all on their own. They kind of have to rely on each other. So if one guy's not bringing his A game, it kind of reverberates through the entire lineup. And then you compound that with their defense, which is extremely unreliable, especially at this tier. You got Toronto, you have Dallas, you have New York Rangers. I would rely on all 3 of their defenses over Quebec. Quebec's a nightmare on defense at this tier. You never know if you're going to get Quebec, who actually kind of understands the concept of playing defense, or the team that's just waiting to give up 10 goals a game, like you said. And then their goalie is just league average, so he's not really going to bail you out a lot, especially in these. Because think about who they're playing. They're playing against Mike Gardner. He's a monster. They're playing against Mike Modano and Russ Courtnall, and they're monsters. Gilmore, he's a monster. So it isn't like you can hide your goalie and your defense in this tier. There are top end forwards on every single team that they have to handle. So you have to hope that the team just kind of comes together and puts, because they're the best unit 1 through 5. They have the best forwards, overall. They have the best defense overall, because there isn't an obvious weakness, but they just don't work together well because they're all kind of similar-ish in a way. They don't really they're not very good at getting the puck back. Like, look at all these forwards, middleweights with low check ratings. You have to do so much work to get the puck back. But when you get the puck back, oh my goodness, this team's amazing if you can get across that offensive blue line, because it doesn't matter who you pass the puck to. They can shoot lights out. They have a couple of really smart guys. Sakic and Sundin, 5 offensive awareness. They're pretty good at finding their spots in the offensive zone. And you just hit them with the puck on a pass, and they do their thing. Sakic's got 5 passing, so you can put him on the wing usually, find some passing lanes to these open players. And it's really difficult to guard them, but it's getting to that spot consistently is the trick with Quebec. I tend to like to start with Sundin at the left wing for EA specials, and he's just a nice winger to have with the slap shot option as well. He's a good enough playmaker to feed Sakic in the middle. And then you have Kovalenko, who's just your industry winger on the right wing, just mowing people down and stopping breakaways and harassing the other team's top player, because he'll knock down Russ Courtnall and Mike Modano and Gartner and Tikin and Messier and Nemchinov and whoever, basically everybody except Doug Gilmore. He's going to have a real influence over. So I think he's, even though you have so much skill, you could put in Ricci, you could put in Kaminsky and Nolan. They have way more skill than Kovalenko, but Kovalenko actually brings something different to the table to give Quebec a defensive presence they wouldn't otherwise have. And a lot of guys, you look at his skating, it's 3 agility, 4 speed. You go, oh, that's not that great, but he's 3 weight. So he actually handles pretty well because he's so light. It plays up his skating ratings to a place where, okay, he feels acceptable. You can chase down people with him and contribute to the defensive side of the ice. And he's not bad on offense like some guys like Bob Basson, who, he's a very poor offensive option. Kovalenko can, do enough damage out there to warrant his starting position. And it makes it really tricky to start guys like Kaminsky, Nolan, and Ricci, even though you want to, because you go, oh man, they got 5 stick handling or shot accuracy or 5 shot power. Or look at Nolan, he's just good at everything. it's tough because Kovalenko, you kind of obligated to put him out there. So, and I don't mind that because I think he's a pretty good player. But if you want to take him out, you can go Sundin, Kamensky in the middle, Sakic on the other wing. Really, there's no wrong way to put your forwards because they can all play offense at a pretty good level. It's just, can you be dynamic enough with them to really threaten the other team consistently, make them kind of back up and not threaten your defense as much, because the defense on this team, I mean, they look good on paper to some extent, but Steve Duchesne might be the worst 4-4 skating defenseman in the game aside from Frank Musil. Guy's always going to the penalty box, loves the penalty box. He must have a good friend in there, or he loves the Gatorade flavor, or they got good towels, they're warm or something. I don't know what's going on in there with that penalty box, but he loves it that they call it, they Quebec. You can't get it in there enough. There's Duchesne. A lot of people bench him because of that, because he doesn't bring anything elite to the table. He's kind of a nincompoop on defense. He has 4 offensive awareness, 4 defensive awareness. A lot of guys don't like it when the defensemen have 4 offensive awareness or have offensive awareness that equal to their defensive awareness, because they feel like they aren't reliable enough. In a lot of cases, Duchesne isn't reliable because even when he's there, he's taking a penalty. So buyer beware on Steve Duchesne, but it isn't like you have amazing options on the bench behind him to really push him out of the lineup on a consistent basis. You have Curtis Leschyshyn, 4 speed, 3 agility, 9 weight, kind of awkward to use, especially when you're facing up against 5-5 skating forwards in this tier. It can be very difficult for him to line up checks. He's also not great with the puck. He's not super aggressive in AI mode, so there's some give and take there. Alexei Gusarov, he's your straight across threes ratings wise everywhere. 6 weight, not quite weight buggerish, but I mean, you kind of hope he just does average guy things and not make you want to just bench him immediately like Duchesne or Leschyshyn can, but with all his mistakes. You hope just Gusarov kind of plays a clean game. Tatarinov, I tend to like Tatarinov as my as an option on my number 1 D pair. So I have Tatarinov with Duchesne as my number 1 D pair. And the reason I like him is because he actually brings something different to the table, kind of like Kovalenko up front. Tatarinov, he's got 8 weight, but he's got 4 checking. So he's good at CB checks. He'll check people on his own. He's good with the puck on his stick. So once he gets it, he can move it out to these forwards that you really want to get going on the counterattack, because they don't skate fast on their own. You want to move the puck fast and accurately. And that's what he can do. And if he's ever in the offensive zone, he's got 5 shot power, kind of like JJ Daniel in a way. You might surprise some people with Tatarinov's shot power because not a lot of people play him. He's getting more and more traction as we move forward as a community, but still you can really surprise people with him. Why most people don't start him? 2 defensive awareness, 2 offensive awareness. That's really low for a defender. I don't see the big deal in it usually, but I think he's a pretty worthwhile player. And then Kerry Huffman's one of your default subs. He's okay, but I wouldn't start him. He's just there for information because you might see him over the course of a game. And Adam Foote's your other, faux weight bug option, 6 weight. If you really, really want weight buggers, you could put Foote and Gusarov out there, but that's asking a lot of these guys trying to shut down the Rangers, Dallas, and Toronto. And that's a lot for them. And you got Ron Hextall behind them. He's breaking a lot of sticks over his crossbar. The stick budget in Quebec better be high for that 1 year he's here. I mean, why do you think he left? He got traded after this year. This was the only year in Quebec, and probably because this defensive unit just drove him bananas. He's kind of heavy-ish, not very agile. He's just kind of your league average goaltender. You can't really rely on him for a bunch, but he's okay. So that's kind of the thing with Quebec is you get all this talent, but a lot of it's very similar, which obliges you, in my mind, to start guys like Kovalenko and Tatarinov to give you something different of a look to try and make this team a little bit more solid on both sides of the puck while still being exciting with it.
In terms of an opponent in this tier, in your opinion, which is the best suited for them to play against where they might have an advantage playing them?
Toronto. You give up the best player in the matchup in Gilmore, obviously. You have to be willing to live with that. And you give the other team the better goalie and the better defense, but you get the better 3 forwards overall. you give yourself tons of options. Toronto doesn't have this kind of depth. Whereas Quebec, you can, if you don't feel it with your lineup, you can go to the bench and go, okay, what do I want to do? And you still are perfectly fine. You have, 10, 12 guys overall that you could start in tier 3 and go, he doesn't look out of place. He's perfectly fine here. Whereas Toronto only has, maybe 6 or 7. So they don't have a lot of options once things kind of start to go against them. Dallas, they can play with Dallas. They can play with the Rangers as well. But it's a bit more dangerous because those are high ceiling teams. If you get high ceiling Rangers or Dallas, it's a mismatch. If you get the low floor of Dallas and the Rangers, it's an advantage to Quebec. If you get medium Dallas or Rangers, I'd say it's about a wash with Quebec. So it's a bit more of a gamble. And you kind of have to know your opponent. It's like, are they okay with using these weirdo teams that are very fast and maybe not the most consistent? Maybe you give them, maybe you put out Quebec and Toronto Quebec and the Rangers and go, okay, well, they will probably take Quebec and I'm okay with the Rangers. Maybe I make that offer. But if I'm not okay with that offer, I would probably stick with Toronto, because some people will pick Toronto, some people will pick Quebec. You'll get both. But if you try to go lower, if you try to go down like Philadelphia, generally the other guy's gonna pick Quebec. If you try to go higher, up against like say Boston or the Kings, you're probably gonna get stuck with Quebec, and now you're trying to fight up a tier. And I don't think this is a team that excels at going up tier. They can, because they have an offensive talent to do it, and they're kind of consistent. So some of the tier 2 teams can also be volatile. But I think that's a bigger gamble than say the Rangers or Dallas.
Good analysis. Last words on Quebec before we wrap up this episode?
It's a very fun team to use, but don't fool yourself too much into thinking you can try and take them up against tier 1 and tier 2. Just kind of stay in your zone with them. Know those 2 or 3 matchups that we talked about within tier 3, and you can have a lot of success with this team if you can kind of tame their defense.
Adams, the best division in the game, or is that the Norris?
I would probably go with the Smythe. I think they have the best top. I mean, they have the 2 expansion teams, which is a real weakness. They're the only team. They're only division in the league with 2 expansion teams. But when you look at the rest of the division, it's a real issue for other teams in matchups. I think the Adams division might be the most consistent division among the 4. There's only Ottawa that's weak. All the other teams pretty good to use. And you typically know what you're going to get out of them, and that's what I appreciate about it.
Well, that's it for another episode. AJ, I appreciate you taking time to come on. We're 3 out of 4 done, and the last one we have left is the Patrick division. So, yeah, thanks for coming on once again, and we'll release the last episode in the next few weeks whenever we get to that. So, thanks so much for this, and if you're listening or watching, remember to keep your controller plugged in and your stick on the ice.